upcoming US presidential election. And one entity that is solely responsible for causing this whole bust is certainly media. We have seen in the past in India itself how media's role had changed the dynamics of 2014 elections. And at a larger scale, a similar thing is happening in the US as well. To give us a greater picture and a detailed analysis today, we are honored to have with us Mr. Richard Buangan. He's currently the Managing Director for International Media, overseeing the offices of International Media Engagement, the Foreign Press Centers, and the Rapid Response Unit in the Bureau of Public Affairs, USA. Mr. Richard joined the US Foreign Service in 1999 and was most recently Chief of the Public Diplomacy Section at the US Consulate General in Jerusalem, where he oversaw the press outreach, the education and cultural exchange programs in the Gaza Strip. Prior to that, he was Director of the Office of Digital Engagement, managing the Department of State's flagship Social Science and Economics magna cum laude from St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas, and speaks French, Spanish, and Mandarin Chinese. So we're grateful to have you.
Thank you, Gara. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
How are you all this morning? Thank you. Thank you very much, Gara, for your remarks. Ask questions. Feel free to challenge me. Feel free to ask anything you want. Although I want to start off talking a little bit about the role of media, particularly in the presidential election. And as long as you have an interest, feel free to ask anything. So just by show of hands, how many of you are following the U.S. election very closely? Not very close? Okay. But you know who the two candidates are, right? And then in terms of comparison, how many of you followed the elections back in 2008 and 2012 when President Obama ran for election? No? Okay. Interesting. So I would love to know why this particular, and we can get to this discussion later about why this particular election season is so much of interest nationally. Tends to take a certain side on issues. It tends to provide its own commentary, which, better or worse, provides a lot of controversy, which is okay. And I think that that's our system of government. And I think appreciate this here in India, being the world's largest democracy, that in countries where we have this free expression, being able to provide the transparency that you see right now taking place in the US election cycle is pretty rewarding for students of journalism, students of political science, international relations. And I think it could also be a window into how countries like the United States and India or in Western Europe, when they experience these elections, how the political process plays out. Now, if you were living in a place that was not democratic or authoritarian, or where you were not able to express your views as freely as you do here or in the United States, you can say that our process is quite noisy and messy and ugly. You can use a lot of negative adjectives to describe what's going on in the United States right now with our election. And a lot of media internationally are coming to the conclusion, erroneously I believe, that the United States is in a downward spiral, I guess. And it demonstrates that the United States is diminishing in its role as the champion of freedom and defender of human rights overseas. I couldn't disagree more. So what I wanted to talk about first is the role of the media and give you guys some clues as to what you should be looking for in the next, let's see, we have less than 100 days now until Election Day in November. Some of the things that the media will be doing in the run-up to the election. We've seen a lot already play out. This certainly has been a very long election season in the United States. That's one of the criticisms of our system, is that, with so many elections that take place, from the primaries to the municipal elections, and we have local and state elections. We also have an initiative and referendum process in some states. one from the outside could look and think, wow, the United States has so many elections going on, how do you keep track? But I just wanted to sort of comment on that very quickly in the course of our discussion. And then to maybe talk about some of the trends that we're seeing, not just with respect to media, but in the elections in general. A lot of you probably have heard the term battleground states. That's still very important, and a term that a lot of US media are using. You've heard a lot of the issues that are being discussed right now in the United States election with respect to the economy, with respect to immigration, with respect to human rights. Foreign policy is now a big deal, especially since Hillary Clinton was the former Secretary of State. And then just talk a little bit about some of the traditional roles that media has in the US election with respect to advertising and the role that it plays in televising the debates, and then some of the new and emerging trends that has happened. And I'd love to hear from you all, particularly what's on your minds about, what do you think about the election, with respect to not just the United States, but what does this mean for US-India relations? What does this mean for our relationship with other countries? So just by way of a general definition, now a lot of you are following this year's election, which is great, but for those of you who don't know any of the particular details, it's very, very close. It's actually a lot closer than a lot of political analysts and pundits predicted a year ago. A lot of them said, and are still saying, that this will be a landslide. I wouldn't necessarily say that. In the United States, particularly in some of the battleground states, that's to say Pennsylvania, Ohio, North Carolina, state of Florida, and to some extent Virginia, Nevada, Arizona. The election is very, very close. And in fact, if you look at some of the opinion polling in some of these states, they are within the margin of error, which means that even though, I think today I heard that Hillary Clinton is leading by 2% in some of the states, or Donald Trump is leading by 1% or 2%. But keep in mind that the margin of error in some of these polls is 3 or 4%, which means that it could be 2% more, 2% less. So I wouldn't necessarily buy into a lot of the opinion polls that are predicting that certain candidates are ahead. But I will say that it's very close. In fact, if not more closer than it was in 2008 and 2012. And I think part of the reason for that is because you have a lot of voter apathy, a lot of voters, in fact, and this isn't me, this isn't my opinion, this is opinion polls that show that you have two very unpopular candidates with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And a lot of voters are still undecided because of their unpopularity. And if you were in the United States and you turned on the TV right now at this very minute, you could probably catch 3 or 4 channels that are talking about the US election in some way. And it might not be a neutral conversation. It might be a conversation about why Donald Trump is the best candidate, because he will protect the rights of the American people, because he will stand up to aggression, he will stand up to tyranny around the world. Or you can turn on the TV and hear voices why Hillary Clinton is the best prepared candidate. She was a former Secretary of State. She lived in the White House. She knows a lot about the Washington network. To a voter, that could be very confusing. And what the role of the media couldn't be more important, I think, in this particular election cycle. Some of the things that I think will be very interesting to watch and I have a couple of things that I wanted to kind of point out, and things that I hope that, if you're watching it, be aware that some of these trends will make or break the campaign. They could play a big difference, I think, into the outcome. Number one, and I think you see this here in India, is the role of cable news networks has really expanded in terms of influencing the narrative, or the various narratives that are playing out in the election cycle. What do I mean by that? Obviously, the narrative that the US is weak, or that the US is in decline. That's a popular narrative that conservatives and Republicans and those who favor Donald Trump are espousing. it helps that you have cable news networks that have commentators and surrogates. You know, the role of surrogates is also a phenomenon that we're seeing in the 2016 election, where you have surrogates who represent the campaigns, but they're independent, so to speak, right? So they don't work for the campaign, but they support Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. There, you see them a lot now on cable news networks, and particularly the big news networks like CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. I would say about 10, 20 years ago, you've seen this gradual shift in reporting. Most news no longer just reports straight facts about a particular election issue. For example, I know when I was in Washington, D.C., just before I got on a plane and came out here, watching the television every night, prime time, from 5 o'clock in the afternoon to 9 o'clock at night. And there's always some issue that the news networks are talking about. Now, interestingly enough, it's not just the straightforward reporting that the news, that you see on the news. There's also commentary that comes along with it, right? So, I'll give you an example. When, the last couple of issues that have come out with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, if I can think of a couple of things, like her email at the State Department, or Donald Trump's remarks on immigration, his trip to Mexico. You could see those things and say, Hillary Clinton, 10,000 emails were released today by the State Department that Hillary Clinton and her staff generated during her days at the State Department. Well, that's not enough. Now you have people who are coming on the news networks and commenting on each email, right? So you have commentators that are looking at Donald Trump's recent speech on immigration, for example, and they will give their opinion as to why it's good or why it's bad. So voters don't just get the straight facts, they also get the commentary along with it, which really plays into the narrative and the way voters look at the election. In the next 70 to 80 days, you'll see that magnified a lot. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you'll get more coverage of that and more news networks devote more airtime to the surrogates, to the commentators, talking about some of the issues and providing that context. And I'm sure that goes on here in India whenever there are elections. So I'd be curious to know later on what your thoughts on that are and some of the comparisons that we can make. In terms of the media also playing a role in the next 70, 80 days, we have 4 debates that are scheduled that will all be televised, 3 presidential debates and 1 vice presidential debate. And these debates are agreed upon by advance by the two candidates and their officials. They are conducted by a nonpartisan group, the Presidential Commission on Debates, and their role is to provide a nonpartisan platform for which both candidates can debate and talk about their issues in front of a live national audience. Now, for both sides, it's a great opportunity to challenge the other side while in the same room, which up until this point has not yet happened. You haven't seen anything where Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were in the same room talking about certain issues. In the United States, that's a great tradition that goes back to really, Abraham Lincoln, when presidential debates were very commonplace before the election. It wasn't until President Kennedy or the election of 1960 when we had those debates on TV. So now you have them on TV, you have them on the internet, you have them on radio, and it provides free publicity, I think, for the candidates. But like I said, there are 4 coming up. The first one is coming up this month on the 26th, and it'll be, the formats, like I said, are agreed upon in advance to excruciating detail. They negotiate who the moderator is going to be. They negotiate at what point do they shake hands. They negotiate who will go backstage with the candidates. That's how detail-oriented these candidates are, because they're very concerned about the image and the optics that it'll present. In terms of the podium placement and who will be on the left and who will be on the right. That is, and as you guys probably know, being broadcast journalism students, that is a very important optic for viewers to see on TV, the camera angle in which Hillary Clinton sits on the left or Donald Trump sits on the right. So these are all very important issues that are being debated by the two campaigns. So the debates, you'll see that play out. And you'll see some of the issues also come to the forefront. Now, the first debate is sort of like a general topic where the moderator will pick the topics that he thinks have been prominent in the media and in public opinion. And each candidate will be allowed to air their views. They'll be allowed to challenge each other. And a lot of people who are trying to predict what will happen are asking themselves, well, how civilized will these two candidates be, right? You saw Trump, you see Trump's demeanor on public TV, you see Hillary Clinton in the way that she's been defending her record. How defensive will it be and how dramatic will it get? So the presidential debates is the second thing I point out in terms of the role that the media will take in the run-up to the election. And then lastly, which I think is also really interesting, which you see more and more involvement in the last 2 or 3 election cycles, is the role that social media is playing. Because it's not enough that candidates have their own Twitter accounts, they have Facebook pages, they have, they're using all sorts of social media platforms, from Medium, which is a social media site where people can post long articles to talk about certain issues. But now you have the role of social media being amplified in the current election cycle. What I think is key for these campaigns, and what I think is a strategy for them, is not so much getting the number of retweets or the number of likes on Facebook. It's getting the broadcast media to report that Donald Trump said this tweet, or that Hillary Clinton had this post on Medium, and this is what it said, right? Because when you're doing things in the social media ecosystem, as we like to say, you only reach that ecosystem, and provided you get a couple of thousand retweets, 10,000 likes on Facebook, but to someone who's trying to convince an undecided voter in Ohio or Virginia, who might not always be on Twitter or Facebook, it's very crucial that the things that the candidates do on social media traverse the sort of online-offline spectrum and play in the offline traditional media as well. So, what does this all mean? Obviously, with the election so close, it's very, very hard to predict what will happen. But I can say that with the role that the media is playing and the way that they evolve towards meeting the needs of voters, trying to sense what's on their minds, trying to exploit perhaps some of the issues and provide this dramatic effect to increase the number of eyeballs that are looking at a particular program. You'll see a lot of drama and a lot of sort of controversy, and which could, for a foreign audience or someone who's looking at it, could be very off-putting. But as I said at the beginning, I think it's a wonderful time to kind of talk about how this illustrates the dynamic of the US election cycle, and how, as in other elections around the world, these types of issues and these types of the ways that the election plays out with the dramatic effect is very commonplace and very normal, particularly in democratic countries around the world. So I would hope that as you watch the election and kind of look at, you could be very frustrated, like as I have been, watching some of the debates on TV. It's personally too, as someone who's the son of immigrants, and when you hear how the issue of immigration is playing on both sides, it affects me personally. And I have a lot of heated debates with my father over certain issues, and I say that this is very common, particularly with Americans. So if foreign media and international audiences are commenting about how distraught and disconnected the election process is, think about how Americans are talking about it in their own households. So I'll stop there, and I'll open it up to questions. And again, we can talk about anything you want, or if there's anything that you want clarified with my remarks, please feel free to ask. Yes, up here at front.
So as you mentioned that media plays a big role in...
He declared his candidacy. A lot of media pundits and talk show hosts, there wasn't a lot of effect to it. It was very informal. Like, I think he was written off as a candidate when he first declared his candidacy. Not just the phenomenon that emerged, though, was completely different. You saw that his movement grew on social media, even though the issues and continues to kind of look at the way that significant number of delegates. Those on both sides, not with Bernie Sanders, but also with Donald Trump, how they invigorate a portion of the report on it. They talk about this growing movement and with delegates, and unfortunately, he wasn't able to do that.
The media is actually, in a way, backing a particular candidate. What does the other section should do?
Yeah.
Like, should it still follow the sacred rule of objectivity, or should it form a sort of counter narrative so that there is a balance in a larger perspective as far as media coverage is concerned?
Yeah.
This is the first question. And the second question again is another similarity that I find is that the increase of rhetoric and dramatics by candidates when they come out in media. So will you associate this simply to the demeanor of that particular candidate, or is it in a way playing to the gallery since there is a huge media coverage?
Mm-hmm. Fox News, for example, which its brand name is, fair and honest, I would say that in the last couple of months, what I've seen, and which I think is a really interesting involvement, is how some of the main broadcast cable news networks, like CNN in particular, how they've tried to really play to both sides. And what do I mean by this? I talked about the role of surrogates, right? So when you look at some of the news networks that are traditionally in favor of certain candidates, like MSNBC, which is usually left-leaning, a liberal news outlet, and Fox News, they usually have surrogates or commentators that support the narrative of that candidate, right? More or less. I'm not saying all the time, but I'm saying that that's the general trend line that MSNBC and Fox News take. With CNN, however, you saw an actual move to the center. You actually had Corey Lewandowski, who was the former campaign manager for Donald Trump, who got fired. CNN immediately brought him on to be a commentator, and he was able to provide commentary during the conventions. When you have certain debates about certain issues, CNN usually tries to make a point about having 6 people on to talk about the issue. 3 are usually for Trump, 3 are usually for Hillary Clinton. So I think part of that is the desire for a lot of these media outlets to provide an open perspective. I would say that if you kind of look at the moderators like Anderson Cooper or some of the sort of news personalities that are leading those discussions, you can tell right away what their leanings are. Right? So but with respect to giving both sides that platform to express their views and defend their candidates, I would say that by and large, a lot of outlets like CNN are making an attempt to provide that platform for both sides. Now, outlets think that they have to counter that narrative, or if they feel like they have to provide the counterbalance, it's really up to the news. And with the advent of the 24-hour news cycle and instant gratification of news that one sees on Twitter and Facebook, in the court of public opinion, the United States. So if Trump tweets something that is very shocking, on Twitter, which you see a lot, or if Hillary Clinton, for example, says something that is immediately capitalized by the conservative media outlets, I think that drives the debate. Voting how something plays out in the long term, because voters, they need that reassurance that what they're looking at is actually looking at more of an interaction with candidates in the online space, right? So, you have traditional campaign stops that candidates really depend on to reach out to voters, particularly in the swing states. But as social media evolves, as it becomes, or limit coverage to a certain number of outlets who are friendly to the candidate, that immediately is seen, given the transparency that you have with the 24-hour news cycle and with Twitter. I mean, for example, look at how journalists use Twitter now, right? A lot of American journalists who are traveling with the campaign do the traditional role of reporting, and they write their articles, and they say at the end of a rally, this candidate went before a crowd of 300 and, talked about the desire to cut taxes or whatever issue is out there. In addition to that now, you have journalists that are actually tweeting, not necessarily what the purpose of their article is, but the atmospherics. For example, if a journalist sees, and this happened on the Hillary campaign during the primary, she was in Iowa, and one of the popular things that candidates do in Iowa is go to carnivals, right? Where they interact with some of the people who are in line to buy hot dogs or whatever. And one of the journalists noticed that whenever Hillary Clinton was moving, there would be a rope that was around her that was held by her aides. And that rope kind of provided that kind of bubble around her. And a lot of journalists didn't necessarily report that in the articles because it didn't make the cut. It wasn't necessarily newsworthy in the sense of traditional media, but it was newsworthy in social media. So say that those types of things distract from the real issues. They probably do, but given the transparency, I think it's very, very hard for candidates. We're interested to see the outcome. We want to influence the way that the elections are going. The Russians or any government would never do that. I'm not going to. There were hackers that hacked into the Democratic National Committee's servers. The FBI and law enforcement authorities took that very seriously. Without respect to political partisanship or favoring a candidate, because cybersecurity is very important, and we want to make sure that not just the election, but in any public discussion that happens in the United States in the public sphere. And I think that it's great that the Russians and the Chinese and Indians and a lot of Western Europeans are reporting on the U.S. election. It shows that again, it's an opportunity for us to kind of show our democratic process, and it's not thrilling to see the narratives that come out from some of these media implying that the U.S. is in decline. Again, I couldn't disagree more. But until there's some solid proof that that there's some foreign government conspiracy, I don't think it's worth commenting on.
They appeal to a demographic which doesn't necessarily vote, a younger demographic which doesn't vote as heavily as, say, blue-collar workers in the 20 to 30 bracket vote. So, and they might be getting their news from TV media. So, in your view, who do you think is like the biggest influencer in the elections? The online media, you think it's come up enough to contest TV media or print media? So which one of you? And my second question is that earlier you had candidates who were, say, ex-governors, ex-senators, and the debate would be on their public service background. So you had Senator Obama versus Governor Romney, stuff like that. But this time it's become more of a personality contest, really. Do you think it's just Donald Trump's antics which have made it a personality contest between a TV personality and a Secretary of State? Or do you feel there's something else at play which has made this election so different from all the other ones that have gone before this?
In the early 20th century, you had political party leaders, Democrats and Republicans, actually choosing the candidate behind closed doors. That is no longer the case, where you have candidates actually going out. That's the reason why you have the emergence of the primary system in the US, where candidates will take their case directly to the people in the hopes of getting enough delegates to get the nomination. But I think that there's always some element of personality behind the election and behind what influences the way voters decide. And in particular with the advent of mass media, with television, it's even more so. It's more amplified out there. You kind of look at the 1960 election between John Kennedy and Richard Nixon. There's this famous analysis where, the very first televised debates, Kennedy had more command just looking like he was in command, right? Even though you could argue that Richard Nixon was just more in command of the issues and knew more about, the politics than Senator Kennedy. But Kennedy was more polished. There was some comments I said that Nixon had beads of sweat that ran down his forehead, which played into the psyche of people who were watching. And I think this influenced the way voters looked, particularly undecided voters, when they had to cast their ballots back in 1960. So I think that personality plays a big role. Your question about the biggest influencer in elections, it depends on who you ask. I think, again, you mentioned the young vote. Young voters aren't getting their information by watching CNN or reading the New York Times. It's very important in disseminating information. If you ask when you have the traditional time slot where evening news plays, it used to play a bigger role, but then now, I think it... I just wanted to say one more thing, and I say this because, your careers, right? Thank you again.
So I have recorded for us, so we will definitely have it. Gaurav, do we have time for a cup of tea with
Okay, you would love to.
Gaurav is an alumni of NNPR department. Yeah, so I am saying so we have us everywhere. And so could you like to speak a few words? Or? Yeah. Thanks for coming actually. He hurried and he rang me up that said that I want to.
So did the Saki.
Oh, okay.
They wanted to formally thank you.
Of course, we understand your paucity of time, sir, but it was a great opportunity to listen to you. And given the age group that we are in, this is this is of course one of the prime concerns. So I would really like to thank Mr. Richard Buangan for the insight that he gave us, and vis-a-vis media, it was a huge opportunity for us. I would also like to thank Ms. Jessica Edwardson and Mr. Gaurav Dwivedi from the press office of US Embassy, and of course Mr. Dwivedi has been an IMC alumnus of the 94-95 batch from the ADPR department. Thanks to everybody once again. It was a great opportunity, sir.
Thanks, everyone.